So let me ask you something. So why does it feel like no matter how much money we make today, we're still struggling to get ahead? Meanwhile, our parents bought houses in their 20s, raised families, and somehow did it just on one income. So were they better with money, or did they just have it a little bit easier than we do? Today we're breaking it down with real numbers and data. 1980 versus 2026. Everything from wages, home prices, cost of living. And by the end of this video, you'll understand something most people don't. It's not that we're failing financially, it's that the game has changed. But there may be a reset on the horizon. So let's start off with the biggest topic, housing. So back in 1980, the average house cost about $63,700. Now the average income was only $21,000 to $22,000 per year, but that means a house costs roughly 3 times the average annual salary. So now let's fast forward to today. So in 2026, the average home price is still around $400,000. Now it's very dependent on where you live at, Alabama versus California, but on average, 400 grand gets you a decent house nowadays. So compared to 1980, that's a 627% growth just in home prices. Now today, the average household income is around 80 grand. Now that is a 363% growth for the average annual income, but to buy a house, it's gonna cost you roughly 5 times your annual salary, sometimes more. And that right there is the entire problem. Homes just didn't go up, they exploded compared to wages. They outpaced wage growth. Now I know people always say, interest rates were crazy in the 1980s, and that is true. Mortgage rates did hit around 16% in the early 1980s. And I do remember my mom and dad always told me they had like 10% yield on their bank CDs, which is crazy for a risk-free asset such as a bank CD. Now mortgage rates today are still in that 6 to 7% range, unfortunately. So it does sound like we have it better, right? But not exactly. When you factor in price, in the 1980s, a mortgage was around 15% of your monthly income. And today it's closer to 30+%. I know some banks even go up to a 40 or 45% debt to income ratio. So that means we're spending more of our monthly income just to have a place to live, just to have a house. So of course it's not just houses that have gotten more expensive over the past 40 years. Think about this, college tuition, absolutely way higher. Healthcare, crazy expensive. Childcare, crazy expensive as well. And wages did go up. Like I said, they went up 360%, but even housing has outpaced wage growth. And that's why it feels like you're basically just walking on a treadmill in 2026 compared to 1980. So here's the truth that nobody wants to say. Our parents built wealth in a system that was easier to enter. They got cheaper housing, a lower cost of living, less competition. And once they bought in, they just rode decades of rising prices. But meanwhile, in 2026, you need a massive down payment to even get a house. You're competing with investors and cash buyers, and affordability is near historic lows in most of the country. So before you think this is all doom and gloom, let's get real for a second. So our parents also dealt with much higher interest rates, obviously I mentioned that. Less access to information. The internet didn't even exist back then. No ChatGPT. How did they even make it? I don't know. But they had fewer investment options too. They didn't have Robinhood at their fingertips on a day-to-day basis. I don't even know if 401ks were around in the early 80s, to be honest with you. But here's the difference. Their starting point was a little bit easier. Ours is just a little bit harder. So what does this mean for you? What do you do with this information? Do you just quit and give up? Absolutely not. You adapt. Because while the game is harder, there's still ways to win, right? You can diversify your income, learn new skills, side hustles, do some trading on the side, whatever. Invest early. Even small amounts matter, especially when you're in your early 20s. Be strategic with your housing options, right? You buy a duplex, live in half of it, rent the other half, have some roommates for 5 or 10 years, whatever it takes to get ahead. And most importantly, stop comparing your timeline to your parents. They played a different game versus 2026. So yeah, I think our parents really did have it a little bit easier when it came to finances in 1980 versus 2026. But that doesn't mean we're stuck. We just got to work a little bit harder and be a little bit smarter with our financial decisions going forward, and we'll be just fine. Anyway, I appreciate you watching the video, and I'll see you again next week.